Greetings, friends, fellow Dharma practitioners. It's my great honor to be with you. And so I am delighted to be able to support at this time with some reflections on the Dharma in response to the times that we're in. And it is at this time precisely that these precious teachings and practices are so vital and so important. We need to draw on them, bring them to life, and reapply them for this great catastrophe that we're in the midst of and walking into through the disconnected ways that we've lived on this beautiful Mother Earth, this beautiful jewel of a planet that we brought ourselves to this near extinction event. This is an incredibly catastrophic situation that we find ourselves in. It's a nightmare. It's not going away. We feel it each day as it grows in intensity. And we need to recalibrate ourselves personally, collectively, but also to recalibrate our Dharma center so we can adequately, more than adequately, but we can proactively meet the times. We are part of the sacred web of life. And that's a beautiful way of placing ourselves. Yet we're in this time of great peril, which is also very real, great peril. And yet it's also a time of unparalleled opportunity, which is also true. In great peril, there's also opportunity. And this is also a very deep call for us to really contemplate deeply, to engage and to apply ourselves. And the opening context from patriarchy to Pachamama is a code for the radical shift that we need from a hierarchical system of ordering human life that has led us to this cataclysmic moment in our evolutionary history, to shift that to a radically, meaning radical, back to the roots, back to something really essential, back to reality of what sustains our life, which entails a shift of orientation that aligns us with the centrality of Mother Nature, Grandmother Earth, which is encapsulated in this particular word, Pachamama, which is a word that also, in its original etymological meaning, denotes a living, dynamic, mysterious intelligence of nature itself. And that intelligence is within our body, within our psyches, although has been relegated over millennia through the patriarchal structures that we've been so profoundly shaped within, that intelligence is actually always been operating even at the margins of our worldview and at the margins of our psyche. And now is in so many ways, it's becoming front and central, both in the ways that Mother Nature herself is being deregulated, as we are seeing through these extreme climatic events, but also is deregulating us. We are also being deregulated emotionally, psychologically. Our societies are being deregulated. This means we're not divorced from the external climate, and the internal climate are deeply interrelated and interconnected. So there is this experience of dukkha, and dukkha needs to be apprehended, met, contemplated, stood with until we see more and more deeply and more clearly the nature of the beast, so to speak. And certainly that's what we're looking at when we look at patriarchy, which literally means the rule of the father. And primarily, just to go back into the midst of time, just to touch a few threads, and I'm not trying to do an anthropological study here or an archaeological dig, but just to touch a few threads to paint a little bit of a picture. It is primarily a system arising post-hunter-gatherer in ancient paintings that we see in caves and on rock faces, like, for example, where Kitty Saranai founded a small center in the Uchlamba Drakensberg mountain region of KwaZulu-Natal in southern Africa. You'll see all around us, and even on the back of the mountain where Damagiri, the small center, is nestled, Umvuleni Bamboo Mountain, which is a magnificent mountain in this great mountain range that runs, it's a spinal mountain range that runs from Johannesburg right down through to the Eastern Cape. It's about 1,600 kilometers long and skirts around the edge of Lesotho, an independent kingdom. That behind and in the caves on Damagiri Mountain, on Umvuleni Mountain, Bamboo Mountain, there are many paintings depicting the stories of the San people, the hunter-gatherers that lived 30, 40, 45,000 years, that lived in relationship to a cosmology of nature, stars, land, animals, and their part was completely participatory and integral to this multi-dimensional universe, which is also inhabited with spirits and forces and presences which are depicted in these paintings. So you see many human forms shape-shifting into part animal, part leopard, part eland, which is the great antelope that the San peoples were entwined with and dependent on. You also see them wrestling, like, for example, in that mountain, there lives what's sometimes called in English the rain beast. We like to think of the dragon, is a being of great potency and power that the shamans would harness to control the weather patterns. And that's why it's called Umvuleni, which means place of rain. As the rains come and the very unusual weather and rain patterning around that mountain area. And in our 20 years of sitting on that mountain and all the practices and mantras and chants and deep retreats we've done there over months and months and months every year, we really feel a relationship with that being. It's very real to us. It's not imaginal. When we've done some of the Guanyin practices, that the thunder will peal and the rains will come, and there's this great response, and you realize that the external world of nature and the beings that inhabit nature and our internal psyche and the intentionality and the energy we bring is completely interwoven. And in a place like that mountain where there's a wilderness area that we're within that's been almost untouched by human beings, there isn't much interference within that relationship. It's very tangible. Of course, with our concrete jungles, the spirits can't live there so easily. So these are the old hunter-gatherer, more egalitarian, often primarily earth matriarchally based societies that were nomadic. But then as the economic system changed to one of agriculture and domestication, what arose was an assumed ownership of land and the idea of private property that could be controlled by men. This was something that indigenous peoples never really understood. How can you own land? You know, it belongs to Mother Nature. But this was something that came in as agriculture developed, including this extended ownership. So this extended to include ownership of other humans, women, slaves, workers, offspring, which eventually organized itself into a system that shaped social, legal, political, religious, and economic systems based in a hierarchical power that was and still is within our living memory and in many places around the world. Patrilineal, meaning that property and assets are inherited, and the names as well within the male lineage. Records kept within the male lineage. If you've ever gone on to find your ancestors, you'll find that it's easier to trace, generally speaking, the male lineages and the female lineages. So this is a sort of lends an invisibility often to the stories of women and their place in societies. So, and in closer to home, and I really, this isn't just a distant anthropological study. This is actually, patriarchy is something that is deeply woven within the Buddhist lineages and transmissions that we teach within and that we inherited. So in terms of systemic structures, say of monastic Buddhism, which shapes the transmission of the Dharma to this day, many people don't realize that Buddhist nuns, for example, have no legal status and are not considered actually even part of the Sangha with its privileges and protections unless they are fully ordained bhikkhunis. So bhikkhuni ordination has not been available in almost all lineages in the last, for about the last 2000 or so years. This means, in practical terms, that properties, physical donations offered to nuns are always vulnerable, even into this time, to be subsumed by monks. This further means that it's been almost impossible for nuns to enable their own autonomy and, along with it, visibility. And so consequently, female monastics, practitioners, teachers have often been historically marginalized, mostly invisible, and also often denigrated. So at the core transmission of Buddhism, the placement of laywomen, teachers, and leaders has also tended to follow the same trajectory of invisibility and lack of support. That is, until very, very recent times. One of my first teachers, I remember, which was Ruth Dennison, who was a tremendous support in my late teens, when I was hitchhiking across to Paris to try and, or to France and the UK to try and catch her retreats. That I remember her once coming to one of the early communities that I lived within, where we were hosting 10-day retreats from the Ubar Kin school, when she had just been excommunicated from that school because she introduced mindful movement. Of course, we all do mindful movement these days, but in those days it was heretical. And I remember sitting through the night with Ruth, listening to her grief and her story. And I really couldn't understand. I was very young and naive, and I couldn't grasp, why has this happened? I didn't really even know the word gender. But of course, this is in living memory, the struggle that's been there. And in many spheres of society, where the onus is often on women to shape themselves within patriarchal expectations before they are accepted. And not only women, all peoples, men as well, those that are also outside the binary and exploring genderqueer dynamics and not being boxed in these, which is also part of patriarchy, boxing people in the heterosexual limitations. What gets accepted at systemic levels, who gets the platform, the voices, the support. So over thousands of years, patriarchy has eclipsed a clear seeing of the feminine, not only by women themselves, but by all, regardless of gender. And the depth of the feminine has been lost. It's like a ghost at the edges of our conscious mind. Alongside that, the masculine has atrophied into acceptable social shapes that rarely allow, and historically haven't allowed, although thank goodness that is opening up now, for vulnerability, access to and sharing of emotion and deeper feeling and intuition. Anne Baring, a Jungian scholar, mystic, and pioneer in the reclamation of the feminine, states, the word feminine stands for the soul and the unseen cosmic web of life that connects each one of us to all others and to the life of the planet and the greater life of the cosmos. In many ways, what we're talking about is a loss of soul, which is really significant in terms of one of the deep causes that have led us to this moment. Of course, there's a lot of nuance in this territory of such a long history and talking about gender and patriarchy and so on, and the words like the feminine. But to simplify and clarify, patriarchy has historically been a system that favors men and heterosexuality and tends, for example, to elevate linear, rational, and cognitive functions as the primary authority of what life is and the world is over a more global, sensing, feeling, intuitive way of knowing. So it's a system that's profoundly shaped us individually and collectively and systemically, which has also perpetuated a hierarchy of ownership and worth according to monetary value. Those favored within the system are allowed to hold power, even in abusive and dominating and violent ways, often without accountability. And patriarchy is ultimately really the meta system that has underwritten all other oppressive systems that sort of hang their coat hangers within it. These oppressions through race, class, caste, gender, and so on. It controls which groups of people are allowed to hold power, who gets visibility, resources, land, is free to move around, even as war criminals, as we've seen, that those that are held completely unaccountable for the devastation of the Middle East, say, in the 9/11, post 9/11 wars, and who gets to even define the story that we live within, and even who lives, who dies. And all of that is actually feeding into this climate catastrophe now, in that if this system underwrites our response, then it's not going to be a very hopeful outcome. But this system lives within us. And this loss, this really deep loss of soul, it's not a word that we use often in the Buddhist metaphor, but it is a reality, the depth of the psyche, the depth of the citta, if you like, the heart. But it is shaped by the sankhara, by these patternings. And this is a systemic patterning that has been shaping for millennia. Interestingly, the word mother, sense of participatory beings in a web of life, this great mother nurturing us to the Father, God, the abstracted divinity, this loss of mother, mater, in Latin, actually connected with the word matter. It is this loss of soul that is really perpetuates this consumption of literal matter, this consumptive society, trying to replace this great pain of loss of belonging by consuming until we've really consumed the earth herself. And, this is something that lives deeply in us, this deep, ripping pain. Maybe it's not conscious, but it lives on the edges of our psyche, and it is felt, and those as a whole, as a loss of meaning, a loss of connection. It's very, very painful, and it produces many different symptoms: depression, despair, and so on, that it just absolutely plagues our society. So we have this is a split, this is an internal split that has come about really through the rise of the solar myth, if you like, of the individuated hero, of the Axle Age religions that place, including Buddhism, Judeo-Christian religions, and so on, that place the divinity in an abstracted, transcendent realm, and not really immanent and not alive and not connected with nature. So the narrative then is very much about individual awakening, this heightened individuality, which is something that we've all been schooled in. And schooled in our meditative world in a way that is often not really deeply embedded within a sense of community. So I think this is, it's not that we, the Buddha talked about it can only start with ourselves, liberating ourselves, but that is not a process independent from being in the web of life and in the relational field. So we've arrived in this moment here of our great time of climate catastrophe and need, where we can't really, if we just look at solutions on the surface level without understanding this matrix that we've come through and the dominant metaphor that we've been shaped by, this hierarchy of power and oppressive systems within it, this loss of soul, this loss of deep connection as participatory beings in the web of Mother Nature, the web of life, sacred life. If we just look at solutions on a surface level, hoping a transition to green energy, that the technocrat high priests of our culture will produce the solutions which are yet to come, are promised. All those in power, media barons, a high percentage of corrupt politicians, really corrupted by being bought out by fossil fuel industries and so on, or the billionaire oligarchs. These are the power players. If we're hoping they will come to the rescue, while the overriding patriarchal system we are still bound within is designed to reward those who rise to the top, who are inevitably going to be sociopaths and psychopaths, who tend to view every human interaction as transactional in service of their insatiable drive to power, then there is no amount of power that will fill that vacuum, that loss. So this is quite difficult territory to talk about. And it's, as meditators, what I want to say next is actually quite difficult, because it's a reality check, even though it's a reality check as to what actually we're facing in this decade, in our lifetime. So it's really good to keep grounded and connected, because we're teetering on the edge of a catastrophic loss of biodiversity. And as that's happening, it inevitably, alongside the irreversible and extreme climate impacts, it will inevitably bring about civilizational, if not complete collapse, with many, many crises piling up on top of each other. In other words, as we inevitably race past the guardrails of 1.5 or Celsius or warming, we will not be able to undertake the radical shifts needed to sustain this sacred web of life that enables human life and the evolutionary potential of life itself. So this is actually the reality of what we're facing as human beings. And it really is shocking. It really has to shock us, because we have to be shocked out of the business as usual. We have to be shocked out of that la-la mindset that really dreams on the same stories, still thinking that we can go along in the way we have been. So in the same way, this is in the first noble truth, going back to the Buddha's first noble truth, second noble truth. We've been looking at those territories, some of what systemically has brought us to this place. Yes, more deeply, we can go right back to the Buddha, the core ignorance of the human mind. But we're also looking at systems, not just internally, but externally, this system that we're in now that's driving this result that we're all having to navigate. And we've all contributed to the result. But the point is, there have been warnings for decades, and those in power that could have changed the trajectory of this result have not done so. And this is a psychopathic mindset that doesn't care, doesn't feel, it doesn't really have any sense of social obligation whatsoever. And that mindset has been politically nurtured for decades, right back, I remember in the 80s with Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of Britain, alongside Reagan, saying there is no such thing as a society. Well, this is really undharmic, to say the least. It's like, do you think you can get your food if there's no such thing as society? Do you think you can take your next breath if Mother Nature is not actually sustaining your very everything right now? In the same way as while we can modify and alleviate dukkha, personally, we can't really free the mind from dukkha until we unpackage dependent origination that clearly lays out this core dynamic of avijja paccaya sankhara, papanchasanya sankhara, this ignorance, this not knowing the true nature of reality, not knowing this true nature of the heart, its own true timeless presence, free presence, this leaning in to find a self, to find a home in the forms and the shape of the khandhas, the taking that movement, the engine of samsara that generates this suffering. And we can't really start to unpackage and unlink from those causes until we actually see the core mechanisms. So this engine that's driving climate catastrophe is intimately linked with the notion that there is a hierarchy of worth in life, that all elements of life itself, people, plants, forests, ocean, DNA, air, water, can be owned, traded in the marketplace, and controlled by whoever is the most ultimately psychopathic, meeting their own ends for their own agenda. And at the heart of this primary delusion that has led us to this moment is the idea that humans are superior and therefore entitled to dominate not only all other life forms, but also to dominate Mother Nature and extract, destroy, and pollute regardless of consequences. So this is a deeply erroneous view. And if we look back again to see the cogs that led us to this moment, it's a view emerging from the Eurocentric thought of the Middle Ages, epitomized by Francis Bacon in the 1500s. He said, "I come in very truth, leading you to nature and all her children, to bind her in your service and make her your slave. Nature must be bound in service, hounded in her wanderings, and put on the rack and tortured for her secrets. The mechanical inventions of recent years do not merely exert a gentle guidance over nature's courses, they have the power to conquer and subdue her, to shake her to her very foundations," which is what the consequence of which we're experiencing now. We are shaking as part of nature to our very foundations. And that shaking is toppling us into an abyss. In this worldview, this scientific patriarchal worldview, the feminine soul that has been relegated must take orders from the patriarchy and be under its authority. Nature must be a slave to human ends in order, and this is to quote Francis Bacon, to regain our dominion over nature that was lost in the fall from grace in Eden. So here we have really a philosophical religious underpinning, underwriting the dominant force that has brought us to this mass extinction event, which is the white Eurocentric Christian inverted sense of moral superiority. It's underwritten several hundred years of burning of witches, so-called witches, women, healers, herbalists, non-heterosexuals, and decimated so-called pagan Europe. It unleashed the justification for a 300-year slave trade, which enabled the rise of capitalism, industrialization, and the collapse of an economy of collaborative commons and shared land. It underwrote numerous horrors that have devastated the colonized world and gave rise to untold wealth in the hands of white Europe and the so-called New World. It gave rise to 2 horrific world wars and the gas chambers in Central Europe. So while at the same time as we look at the wheel of dependent origination and the suffering it gives rise to suffering, suffering then gives rise to the path of freedom. So suffering is a cause to liberation. And so this deeply oppressive history, devastating history has also that have subordinated the majority of the world, and in particular the non-white world, has given rise to numerous liberation movements, which goes back into the mists of time. So it is time for us now to really take stock of where our allegiance lies. Does it ally with these old power structures of patriarchy and all their manifestations and all the internal agreements and narratives we hold in allegiance to that? But it is, if we are holding allegiance, we're holding allegiance to a system that is effectively killing us all. Emerging from COP22, while there were many positive outcomes and commitments, but none of them, even when factored in, will reverse the current predicted 2.4 Celsius temperature rise, which is disastrous. This is devastating, actually, and it clearly means that the current leaders intend to go on with business as usual and are willing to enable the consequences, which is nothing short of the collapse of our civilization. They believe they will withstand all this and take the spoils. People might think I'm being alarmist, in the same way those reporting back about concentration camps trying to warn were dismissed. No one can believe such atrocities can be dreamed up and actually executed, but patriarchal history is littered with such atrocities. In Buddhist practice, we're often encouraged to let go of the past. It's good advice. We do need to let go. But the past will not let us go until there is a reckoning, until we wake up. Karma vipaka is real and it demands to be engaged. Practitioners, and in particular meditators, we are in mindful presence. We're not just engaging in a more clinical, surgical observation of body sensation, feeling and mind states and phenomena. We're entering the very depth of ground where the ancient and ancestral and epigenetic, the transference at very deep levels of trauma and patterning of history through generations lives in our bodies, in our psyches, in the energetic patterning, in our conditioning, in our beliefs, and in our very soul, shaping the most subtle way we experience our core being. People are waking up because we're reaching a tipping point, not only externally in what we're seeing, but in the human psyche. There is a moment where we can continue on this catastrophic trajectory, or we can really wake up and stand up in that awakening and respond. A recent UN poll in January of this year said 2/3 of the globe, and probably more after the August IPCC report, deeply know we're in a climate emergency and want climate action. But as we see, the mass of the populations are still frozen, like unable to move, like in a trance. So we all need help to break the spell of these old, deadly narratives that will literally continue to drive us over a cliff until this magnificent, beautiful, unique earth, as one of our teachers in Southern Africa, Baban Mandaza Kandemwa says, an elder and carrier of the spirits, says this gorgeous, he calls this earth, this gorgeous woman, this gorgeous woman is in danger of being turned into a ball of red hot dust. But as the Buddha said to Angulimala, we can stop however far we've gone along on a murderous path. We can stop. We need to find our voice. We need to find a different way, a different orientation from which to engage. As Dharma centers, practitioners, teachers, leaders, we are moving into a territory. In fact, we're in a territory already that we need to prepare for. We can't dream walk this. We can't just rely on old things that we've sort of dragged out of the cupboard before. We need to put the same level, an even greater level of focus, funding, research, discussion, inquiry, as has been happening around white supremacy and race in our meditation centers, such a profound impact in shaping the Sangha and the teaching, very positive impact. We need to put that and more, with more urgency, into preparing and exploring optimum responses, the creation of resilience, the activation of engagement, the cultivation of sanctuaries of sanity, the engagement with acts of civil disobedience for those who can be activists, that they can have support, the investment of finances, the alignment and support of numerous organizations and projects working for sustainability, to protect the Amazon, to lift up indigenous voices, to enable land back movements and reparations, there's a million and different ways to engage that are, for example, a very low-hanging fruit in being able to impact the lessening of the warming of the biosphere is to shift into plant-based diet. And it is not violent not only to animals and abusive, but also to those that work in this industry, particularly in the slaughterhouses. This isn't something we should be associated with. Offer plant-based diets in every center. We're at this myth-breaking, myth-shattering moment. The myth of the systems that we've been in, they are being unveiled and seen to be rooted in a history of massive amounts of violence, degradation, the extraction of Mother Nature, the decimation of First Nation peoples, the horrors of the slave trade, the marginalization due to race, color, caste, class, and so on, geography. These are all hard things that we look at. And in the undoing of a central myth, the places that have orientated us and the maps that have gone before, we find ourselves in mapless territory. An unknown lies before us. The ground beneath us is eroding, and we are haunted by a past whose momentum is deadly. Ajahn Chah, he talked about practice is the preparation for meeting difficulty, for meeting challenge. This practice is a way that we find and reorientate within a new story, that we infuse it with focus and life and vision, that we empower our voices to speak out and to engage more fearlessly, to speak truth. We have entered a climate justice revolution, and the Dharma jewel that we are custodians of, it is imperative we don't just sit this out and watch from the sidelines. This doesn't only apply for us as lay people, but also for monastics, for all of us in the fourfold Sangha. Central to this new story has to be a reconnection to the spirit of Mother Nature, which is calling to us, living within us, screaming us awake with her messages of infernos and floods and melting ice caps and the loss of each and every species, the heartache of that. She's calling to us through heartache. We feel that. I feel it every day. Panic and heartache. Pachamama, Pachamama. I love this word. It's a word from the Andean indigenous peoples of South America and has a particular meaning denoting the spirit of Mother Nature, literally meaning in Shipipo, Quechua, Aymara languages, literally meaning world mother, earth mother, goddess. She is the goddess, as Baba Mandaza says, she is the I am, the I am. She is everywhere, every breath, every piece of food that we ingest to sustain our life, the water. Pachamama enhances the term Mother Nature because it portrays an understanding that Mother Nature is infused with consciousness, is a living reality, a deep, unfathomable living force and intelligence And for the Amazonian peoples, indigenous peoples, this is a very real reality. Pachamama is in their artwork and in their dreams and in their rituals and in their ceremonies. And in spite of the horrors, which were horrific in South America, of colonization, the rubber plantations in particular, for example, in Peru, horrific. This Pachamama, this deep faith and love, has been a core pulse that has carried indigenous peoples through thousands of years, whether in the Amazon, across Turtle Islands, in the Americas, North, Central, and South, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, New Zealand, the San of Southern Africa, and around the world. But Pachamama lives within us too. We are all originally indigenous. Even in the midst of time, we feel the loss. Pachamama lives within us as a sense of deep belonging, a call in our night dreams, a wildness at the edge of our boxed-in lives. She is intensifying through what we feel in our hearts and our bodies as each piece of dismembering news arrives, with the loss of ice, infernos in the Arctic, across Siberia, in Australia, the devastating floods in Bangladesh, Germany, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, the loss of birds singing, the loss of moths gathering around night lamps, the deadly silence of spring. As Dharma practitioners, and particularly as meditators, we're entering the ground of this ancient soul, embodied psyche, our beingness. We're feeling that, we're connecting with that, we're reconnecting with that, we're reconnecting this coupled with mindfulness, yoniso manasikara. Yoniso is often translated wise contemplation, yoni, the womb, manis, the mind, sikara, to put to this mind, to put all of this complexity, trauma, pain, history, confusion, stuckness, frozenness, rage, upset, pain, panic, fear, to put this into not the thinking mind, which is actually just going to be activated into massive reactivity, to put this into the deep jitta, the deep, unsplit, seamless, knowing presence, timeless presence, unshakable presence of the original heart. Bringing things and held, like in the Heart Sutra, we find Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin Bodhisattva, contemplating at ease, not just sort of pushing things away and trying to be enlightened, but keeping things that aren't that peaceful out there. Contemplating at ease, immovable, the heart immovable, contemplating at ease the nature of all things, all beings, all circumstances. One, suffering stimulates the path overcomes suffering. This enormous catastrophe that we're within, this enormous challenge that we have, can stimulate, has the potential beyond our dreams of what is possible, because we no longer are deferring to an old system that has ruled and controls this human consciousness through fear and diminished ideas of ourself and our being, through shame and guilt, and through various forms of oppression and any identification that we have as male, female, or any other way that we view ourselves. But to actually realize that our allegiance is with this living spirit of the Dhamma, this Pachamama. Old translation of the Dhamma is nature. This matrix, primordial matrix of the heart, the undying present heart. And in that heart there arises knowing that then can inform this cognitive, rational mind that can then translate into application. It's the great turning, as Joanna Macy says, the potential to turn and to see the intimacy of all things and to trust that when we return, we don't have to figure it all out. When we return to this knowing presence, intuitive knowing, deeply rooted and connected with depth, and we hear so much more. This is a living world. We hear, we quiet down, we can hear guidance, we can hear the next steps. This mind, Ajahn Mahabua says, when it gains change of lineage knowledge, passing from the mundane over to the transcendent, or the immanence of transcendence here in this heart embodied, the fullness of the citta embodied, the light of awareness. It will see what dies and what doesn't, he said. It will blossom as Buddho, the awareness that knows no cessation, the awareness, the deathless heart, unshakable, grounded, timeless, able to meet whatever it is, whatever arises, and still maintain peace, equanimity, joy, love, and fearlessness, the fearless heart. This is possible for us. This is within our practice. This is what we practice for. This heart, this living Dharma, this amatta, deathless, santitiko, always here and now, akaliko, timeless, ehipassiko, come and see and know for ourselves, or panayiko, leading inwards to the source, pachatang, for each of us to experience and taste for ourselves. This entering the stream of the Dhamma, relinquishing envy and hypocrisy, any domineering ways, the cultivation of generosity, authenticity, the uplifting of others. And so there is a beloved circle, inwardly and outwardly, where outside of the walls designated by patriarchy, which is oppressing all beings, whatever gender, whatever class of being, where there's a storehouse of untamed dreams that will decolonize our minds, our hearts, and our bodies. As practitioners, as we undergo this dismemberment at this time, there's also this gift that is ours to pick up, even as we are swimming in this uncharted flow of consciousness itself. Like plunging to the core, there is into a light nucleus that is here, there, everywhere, without center or circumference. Wherever we touch is conscious being presence, unbounded, creative, a bubbling spring birthing forth the matrix of light, manifesting as matter. It is here, intersecting timeless presence with attention and intention at the point of emergent manifestation, where we can energize quantum shifts, because mind, said the Buddha, precedes all things. The intentionality of mind is something we can set. There is the prayerful way of being as we breathe and ground with each breath and realign ourselves by withdrawing all agreements that we have with systems that oppress, that systems that are driven to destroy this planet, to withdraw our energy from what habitually and unconsciously that we're colluding with that undermines well-being for self and other. So, dear friends, we're on notice. We're on notice as a human race. So let us prepare ourselves for the challenge together. It's time to simplify. It's time to renounce the ways of exhaustion and deprivation and drivenness. The old story is finishing with its tiresome and deadly perpetuation of misogyny, homophobia, racism, sexism, imperialism, nationalism, white supremacy, speciesism, or any other ways we hold any part of Mother Nature, Pachamama's creation, as inferior. It's time to break set, maybe to dance, to sing, to play music, to write poetry, to breathe more fully, to meditate, and free this body, mind, and heart and spirit from the ancient controlling mechanisms of fear, shame, guilt, lack of worth, violence towards self and other. There is another way, aligning with this indwelling spirit of intuitive guidance, this deathless awareness that can travel with each breath, grounding and soothing, connecting, that frees us from allegiance. This old dying world as our brain rewires and we re-regulate ourselves each day. As we dream a new story of collaborative stewardship, returning to the root, reaching to the stars, walking the way of whales, eagles, hummingbirds, walking with our indigenous ancestors. Small and big steps within our gathering community of renewal mean we are no longer in service of the empire-making machine, but instead are devoted to Mother Nature, to Earth, to the Dharma, the sacred web of life. This is a devotion that calls for action. We cannot allow our exquisite home, with its myriad life forms forged over billions of years, to be left wandering like a lonely, burnt planet in this cold universe. We must love it back to life and each other. So, dear friends, may we treasure these Dharma centers. May they be places of deep inquiry, renewal, fearless engagement, radical reorientation, conversations where we share what we feel, where we pull together with resource ourselves and build resilience, where we reach out of our silos to meet with others, where we build under the collapsing world, the dinosaur of this old system that's led us to this point of death. Hold faith to the possibility and the reality of building with love. As people rise together, may we rise too, to break set. May we shatter the spells that keep us frozen in a trance. And as people rise together, may we join in unleashing a chorus of beautiful, authentic, true voices. May we take faith in the way of the Buddha, who set an example not only of internal awakening and freedom and peace, but who forged a radical community, who undid systems of oppression, who nurtured and supported all beings and turned a Dharma wheel that we benefit from this day and this age, and encouraged us to go forth and to teach accordingly to time and place, so that this Dharma is a medicine that can heal, is a nectar that can soothe, is a fearless light of awakening, is a voice that can give direction, and is a light that can shine and illuminate a path. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you so much for your invitation and for being with me in the unfolding of this offering and this Dhamma talk. All blessings.